In part 3, I am going to talk about deliberate practice and testing. For almost 40 years, Anders Ericsson has been studying the top athletes, musicians, chess players, teachers, mathematicians, and he's doing that to figure out what makes them experts. When Ericsson was starting out as an assistant professor at Carnegie Mellon University, he wanted to see if people could improve their short-term memories. So he hired an undergraduate, Steve Falloon, to come in 3 times per week to work with him on remembering a series of digits. Ericsson would start out saying a sequence of digits like 1473, and Steve would repeat 1473. Then Ericsson would increase to 5 digits, then 6 digits, then 7 digits, until Steve missed one of the digits. Then Ericsson would reduce the number of digits, and they would start over. Generally, people can only remember about 6 or 7 digits. Can practice increase this limit? Did Steve ever get beyond single digits? After a few weeks, Steve was discouraged and tired of doing this and wanted to quit, but he stuck to it, and he actually got beyond single digits. In fact, he got all the way to 82 digits. And in fact, he became a sort of minor celebrity, appearing on some TV shows for this ability. So how did Steve do it? Well, one step he took was he started to associate 3 digits with something. So he was a runner. So if he saw maybe, say, 4:59, he would think, well, that's his best time for running a mile. So all he had to remember was his best time for running a mile, not 4:59. So if he had something eventually in long-term memory associated with every 3-digit number, then by memorizing these 7 things instead of 7 digits, he could get to 21 digits. Ericsson has found that purposeful practice is required to become an expert. And it was purposeful practice that Steve was doing to get to where he could memorize 82 digits. So purposeful practice involves having a well-defined specific goal. In Steve's case, it was memorizing long sequences of digits. Then you have to put a bunch of small steps together to reach a longer goal. So those small steps, the initial one for Steve was memorizing an association with every 3 digits. The practice has to be focused then, and the practice has to involve feedback. So in Steve's case, the feedback was just whether he got it right or wrong. But in most endeavors, you want to have a teacher or a coach who's giving you feedback to direct your purposeful practice. And you have to get outside of your comfort zone. So you have to be pushed a little bit beyond what you're capable of doing to become better at something. In school, deliberate practice is a way of approaching the material to learn the material so you develop a mental representation and understand the material, and it's not studying to obtain a grade. The actual grades will come if you develop this understanding and mental representation. Let's look at an example that involves chess players. So in this study, they had chess players that were at the national level, mid-range ranking, and novices. And these chess players were shown a board for a few seconds. In some cases, the pieces were in an arrangement of an actual game, so it was somewhere in the middle of a game. And in other cases, the pieces were just put down there randomly. So the question is, what did they remember? When the pieces were arranged in an actual game, national level players would remember where most of the pieces were. Mid-range players about half, and novices only about 4. Whereas if the pieces were just put down there randomly, all the players would only remember where a couple of the pieces were. The national level players have developed an in-depth understanding of the game of chess. The arrangement of the pieces in the middle of a game has meaning to the national level players, so they could recall where most of the pieces were. These national level players do not get this ability from just playing games. It is from studying games played by masters, analyzing positions in depth, predicting the next move, and if you get it wrong, going back and figuring out what you miss. So the type of practice matters. Let me give you another example with something that you have developed mental representations for. So here I have a bunch of words, and take a couple seconds and see how many of those you can memorize. So the number of words you probably remember are maybe 6 or 7. That's your limit of short-term memory. Now let me show you that same set of words, but in an arrangement that will have meaning to you. Now take 5 seconds and memorize this set of words. So now how many do you remember? You probably remember just about all the words. You have an understanding of the English language and the use of sentences to convey a concept. So when the words are arranged in a manner that there's some meaning to them, that aids your memory. This is why you should approach your studying in a manner to gain an understanding of the material rather than trying to memorize some procedure for solving a problem. If you develop that understanding, then solving problems will become much easier and you'll perform much better on exams. Students and teachers view testing as a means of assessment, but there are many learning benefits to testing. It is a type of deliberate practice. So when you're taking a test, it's a retrieval exercise that's going to aid future retention. The problems typically are a little bit different, sometimes a little more novel, so it'll aid in forming connections between the material that you're studying. Frequent testing keeps students on task and interrupts forgetting. When you take a test or a practice test, you discover gaps you have in your knowledge, and you're able to learn more in the next study episode. If you get anxious while you're taking a test, let me just suggest that you take a few seconds and take some slow, deep breaths with long exhalations. Often you'll find that will have a calming effect and you'll be able to return to working on the exam. Let's look at a study that shows the benefits to learning of taking a test. So 120 undergraduate students studied 2 scientific passages. One was on the sun and the other was on sea otters. So the first group studied the 2 passages twice for 7 minutes each. The second group studied the 2 passages once for 7 minutes, and in the next 7-minute segment wrote down as much as they could recall from the 2 passages. Okay, then each group was split into 3 groups and tested. One group was tested 5 minutes later, one group 2 days later, and one group 1 week after the last session. So the 2 groups that took the test 5 minutes later, the group that studied twice performed a little bit better than the group that had a study session and then tested themselves. But if you look 2 days later, you can see the group that did the study and then the test performed significantly better than the group that just had the 2 study sessions. And 1 week later, those who did the study test retained almost twice as much material as those who did the study session. So testing doesn't equal studying. Testing is greater than studying. Let me mention some ways not to study. Don't read your text and your notes over and over again. Don't do a lot of highlighting. If there's a problem, don't just glance at the solution and say, oh, I see what they did. Don't spend a lot of time looking at chapter outlines provided by teachers or your texts. Okay, what happens when you do this is you're mistaking familiarity with the material with knowing the material. You misjudge the depth of what you know. You're just doing something repeatedly and expecting that the repetition alone will improve your performance. This is something that's referred to as the fluency competency illusion. So let me talk about how you should study. Okay, so again, you're approaching it as a way to learn the material and not as a way to obtain a grade. If you learn the material, the grades are going to come. So you do have to read the text and look over your notes. Just don't go over and over them. So maybe spend no more than 20 to maybe 30% of your time. Okay, so what you want to do is spaced retrieval exercises. A way to do this is sometime after a class, say the evening after a class, sit down with a piece of paper and a pencil and just try to recall what was discussed in class that day. When you're walking to a class, try to think about what was discussed in your lecture the last time. You want to work problems. So these can be problems that were assigned for homework, examples in the text, problems in the text that weren't assigned, previous exams. And when you work these problems, when you get stuck, don't just look at the solutions. Let it sit. Get away from the problem. Go take a walk. Wait till the next day. Give your mind some time to do some diffuse thinking, because if you can come back later and then figure out how to work the problem, the learning will be much deeper. Explain the material to someone or explain it to yourself out loud. There was an experiment where there were two groups and they were assigned problems. So one group worked them in silence and the other group was told to talk out loud every step as they worked through the problem. And the ones who were talking out loud did much better on the problem set than the ones who worked the problems in silence. If you don't understand something from the explanation in class or from the text, there's all sorts of materials online, such as videos and alternative explanations that you can utilize. I have talked about how testing is a powerful way of learning, a deliberate practice. You can take advantage of this testing effect by obtaining previous exams for the course you are taking. Take one of those past exams and sit down with it and take it. Set the same time limit you will have for the actual exam and do not use any resources such as your text or notes, which you will not have during the actual exam. Now wait a day and allow some of that diffuse thinking to occur. Now go back and see if you can solve any of the problems you could not work the day before. If you can now solve them, then you will have more deeply learned the material. You probably have all had that experience when after an exam, how to work a problem comes to you. You want that to happen when you are studying, not when you are actually taking the exam. This way, when you encounter such a problem on your actual exam, you will know how to solve it. Only at this point, if you do not know how to solve a problem, look at the solutions or ask someone for help. Now start the process again. Take another one of the previous exams, work through it, let it sit for a day, come back and see if you can solve the rest of it. Keep doing this till you run out of exams. Then try writing exam problems. If you can write problems similar to those that will be on the exam, then you have really learned the material. You can also go back and retake the previous exams that you have already worked through. Even back in 1939, it was known what a powerful study method is of taking an exam. Immediate recall in the form of a test is an effective method of aiding the retention of learning and should therefore be employed more frequently. In this table is a list of study strategies, and 177 undergraduates were surveyed at Washington University, and almost 84% said rereading the notes or the text was used as a study aid. And in fact, 55% rated that as the #1 method they used for studying. Only 12.5% indicated that doing practice problems was their #1 method of studying, and only 1% used practice recall or self-testing as their #1 form of studying. This indicates that students can greatly increase their learning by incorporating more self-testing, practice recall into their studying, and more doing practice problems into their studying. You should start your studying alone and spend the majority of your time studying alone, but you should augment this with study groups. Okay, so once you've been working on the material and have some understanding of it, a study group is a good way for you to catch errors in your thinking. Also, it's an opportunity to explain things out loud, which we've already mentioned is a good study aid. And it's a way for you to become comfortable explaining things to others, which is something that you're probably going to have to do in some of your classes. A study group is also a good way to determine if there's errors in credible sources. So there may be an error in your textbook, there may be an error in something your instructor told you that you can quickly determine in your study group. You also want to be careful to make sure your study group does not turn into a socializing session. You should take advantage of office hours, both of your teaching assistants and the professors. Your goal should be to try to get at least one professor a semester who knows who you are. The best way to do that is by visiting during office hours. So why would you want professors to know who you are? Well, the main reason is when you're a senior, you will need references. And if no professor knows you, it's going to be difficult to find those references. Now, if you're shy or an introvert, what may help is to get a friend in the class to go with you to office hours. Also, if your professor knows you, there's a possibility of getting the benefit of the doubt when grades are being assigned. In Part 4, I'll talk about your participation in lecture and the role of sleep on learning.